Hello, everybody. My name is Miss Amber Stokely. I am one of the English and elective curriculum guides or tutors, and I'm here with your live reading lesson for today. If you're watching, this is a recording of the lesson. We are covering the Declaration of Independence, which is the reading selection for English 11A, and that's the very last lesson in Unit 1. It is the sixth lesson, 1.6. Just as a reminder, if you are watching one of these videos for the first time, these videos are basically to do an overview and to help you understand the reading selections. There is a separate series of videos for going over the rest of the lesson, some of the historical details, and some of the like grammatical and literary device stuff. So if you are looking for those, please feel free to reach out to me, your advocate, or your mentor, and they can point you in the right direction to find that material. If you just need a quick brush up on some vocabulary, we do also have like PowerPoint slideshows with some information about that if you just need things to put in your notes. This video here is mostly to help students that are having a hard time getting through the reading selections and understanding what's being said. Now, I will say this is an English class. So sometimes you have to learn about concepts first before you can get into the reading. So we're going to be hopping around the lesson a bit. If you're watching this video, you should have attempted to get through the reading selection and the tutorial. This is for Voice of a New Nation. You should have tried to get through that tutorial already on your own, because we're going to be hopping around a bit from slide to slide. If this is your very first time going through the lesson, I strongly urge you to try to read through it on your own first, as you'll be locked out of being able to move ahead of slides that you currently have done. If you are absolutely just lost, you tried to do the tutorial for the first time and you just aren't having any luck, sit tight. We will be going through the reading selection if you're stuck on it. So if you do absolutely need that, this might be able to help you. All right, so I'm going to start with sharing my screen and we'll get started there. Okay, so like I said before, we're going to be hopping around a little bit just to make sure that we have all the information that we need to try to understand the reading selection. The way that these lessons work is they try to give you a little bit of preliminary information, and then they'll take you to the reading selection, give you the chance to sort of read it yourself and figure out what you think, and then they'll give you the analysis. So I won't quite be doing that the exact same way. There's a couple pit stops that we're going to make later on in the lesson before we actually get over to reading it, just because I think if you're really having trouble doing it in order, sometimes looking at some of the information that they give you later on before you go back to read might help give you a little insight. So we are going to start with me just touching on a couple ideas and concepts from early on in the lesson. There's a couple things that they review here on slide 5 that are important. Again, we're not reviewing the entire lesson. I'm just touching up on what's important. You need to know what a counter argument is. They tell you what a counter argument is. It says here, an argument that refutes or addresses any objections that someone with an opposing view is likely to raise against the claim. Now, when you're going through these lessons on your own, if you were to read this definition, you're like, I'm not exactly sure what it means. I don't know what refutes means. This would be the spot where you would look it up. So what I'm actually going to do, just to give you guys a little encouragement, is we're going to look up the word refute definition. And you can do this on your phone or anything else. But yes, here we've got to prove a statement to be wrong or false, also known as disproving. So if you're refuting something, you're disproving it. So if we come back here, it says a counter argument is an argument that refutes, right? So that means disprove. You're proving that something is wrong, or addresses objections that someone with an opposing view, opposing means the opposite, right? So like opposition, you're going against something. is likely to raise against the claim. So this is a very fancy way of saying, if you have a statement that you're trying to push as being true, and someone says, hey, I think I have a problem with this, and you're able to disprove that problem, you're able to prove why it isn't actually a big deal, or that maybe it's something that people usually think is a problem but actually isn't. That's what a counter argument is. You're basically addressing someone who's saying, I'm not sure if what you're saying is true, and saying, yes, it is for this reason, or these rumors about this thing aren't true, which helps my point. That's pretty much what a counter argument is. You're acknowledging someone that's against you and saying, I see your problems with this, but those aren't actually accurate. That is a counter argument. And then there is a section that asks you about logos, pathos, and ethos. Now, these are ideas that you should have in your notes from previous lessons. So I'm just going to talk about them briefly. They don't really go over it in detail in this lesson, but just as a reminder, in case it's been a little while since you started up on these lessons or something like that. Logos is when you use a logical appeal, right? You're showing someone my point makes sense because I have evidence to support it. Pathos starts with a P, P-A-T-H-O-S, right? Now, the way that I remember pathos is related to passion. They both start with the same letter, the letter P. The reason why this is important is because pathos is when you appeal to emotion. So think about, for example, when you see commercials for like animal shelters and they want people to donate. They talk about how many animals die in shelters every year, right? That's very sad. And they're convincing you to donate based on how sad that situation is and how unfortunate that situation is. So that is an emotional appeal. When you offer an argument that is supposed to appeal to how someone feels, right? A lot of the time people think of guilt tripping when they think of this, but it isn't always guilt tripping. Sometimes you're motivated by knowing that you would feel good, right? So for example, if someone's trying to convince you to volunteer your time, like at a homeless shelter or something like that, and they talk to you about, like how good it feels to actually hand people items that they need and know that you're helping them, that's an emotional appeal, but in a positive way. So there's different ways to do it. And then the last one is ethos. Ethos has to do with credibility. So you're appealing to things that people trust, like their sense of pride, or someone whose character is very truthful, right? So if you have someone who's, like testifying on your behalf, for example, in court, and they're saying, oh, well, this person, I don't think that this person meant to do this thing, or that they weren't being malicious, or that they didn't do it at all, because they're not the type of person to do this. I have a history with them. We go way back. I know what kind of behavior they exhibit. That's an appeal to credibility. You're telling the judge, this person is a good person and they can be trusted to be out in society and not be in jail. Other ways to think of credibility arguments in terms of like debate or persuasion. Think of like when you have an expert testify something that they've seen during like their studies. The fact that they are an expert on the topic gives them credibility, right? If you've been working with, for example, physics for 20 years, that's your area of study. You've done nothing but study that. You've gone to school, you've done a lot of things. People are going to trust what you say about physics because of your experience in the field. That's your credibility, your trustworthiness. Can you be believed? Other ways to appeal to credibility is to appeal to things that society agrees are good, right? So if, for example, you're persuading people to recycle because of the damage that's being done to the earth. We all want to save the earth, right? So that sense of knowing what's right is an appeal to credibility. So those are different ways to do that. Credibility is trustworthiness, things and ideas that we trust. people we trust, ideas we trust, and things that we know are good, right? So again, logos is logic. This is when you're presenting information. I know that this thing is true because this information supports it. We did a test. These are the results. This person asked these other people. This is what they said as part of the study. These are the numbers that we have. This is the proof that we have, right? So logic involves proof. Pathos involves emotion. Ethos involves credibility. Can you trust this? Is this the right thing to do? Alrighty. So now that we're past those things, I want to stop on slide 19, I believe. Oh, no, actually not 19. Okay. We're going to actually push forward a little bit to slide 22, actually. Now, the lesson here is on the Declaration of Independence. Slide 22 has vocabulary from the Declaration of Independence. So they give it to you here. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of other words that you may not know from the Declaration of Independence, but they took the most difficult ones, the oldest ones that are not really used anymore, and they put them on this table so that you didn't have to look them up. Now, it might help you to come to this slide if you've already gone through the lesson and write these down. If you have not, here they are on screen for you. You might want to write them down, put them in your notes. So sometimes it helps. There's no real way to learn these words other than to try to use them often. If you are a student who wants to put in the extra work, you're really trying to build your vocabulary, it helps to not only write these down like on index cards and trying to memorize them, but trying to come up with sentences that you can use them in helps a lot. I'm not going to read through them, like through the whole table here, but I will read through these words one time just so that you can hear them without having to go back into Genius or Admentum and have the voice read it out loud. So from top to bottom, we have acquiesce, arbitrary, impel, magnanimity. That's a little difficult. Magnanimity. Perfidy, rectitude, and redress. All the definitions are here under definition. They do spell out the pronunciation for you here. And they do give you parts of speech. So parts of speech just tells you how, like different ways you can use the word, right? So a verb is for action, it's something that you do. A noun is a person, place, or thing. So it's a thing that you can talk about. And there are other forms of these words too. Just as a small refresher, an adjective is a word that you use to describe a noun. That tree is tall, right? The tree is the thing. Tall is the way you're describing it. Adverbs is the same thing, but for verbs. It describes a verb. I ran quickly to the store. Ran is the verb. That's what you're doing. Quickly is how you did it. That's how we're describing what you did, right? And I think that that's just about it that you need for this. So we are going to hop back to our reading selection here. Let's see. Okay, we're on slide 9. The reading selection can be found on slide 11. So they do give you a strategy for reading here. But if you're watching this video, then you've probably had a difficult time regardless. So the strategy for reading basically talks about charged words. These are words that have emotions that are attached to them. And basically they want you to think about what type of emotion words that you don't see very often are supposed to have on you. So when we think of words that we use commonly, you know, the, it, he, she, where, here, there, those don't really have a lot of information attached to them because we use them all the time. But the example that they give you here for a charged word is loyalty, right? So you hear the word loyalty and you think about what it means. It means that you have a duty and responsibility. Now, it's important to break down not just the words, but how we think about them. When you talk about people being loyal and being loyal to you, you're talking about people actually, you know, like showing up, coming through, being responsible, and actually being reliable. All of those are positive things, right? So loyalty is when you have duty or responsibility, right? Like you're obligated to be there for someone, but in a good way. I'm sure that some of you have been obligated to do things in what you would consider to be a bad way, right? A way that you would consider to be a burden. So, like when you have to always go somewhere with your parents, they have a schedule like once a week that you have to make. When you go to the uh, doctor, for example, right? These are all like duties that don't have good connotations. Even if we're talking about um, maybe like you have a younger sibling that likes to do stuff that you don't like to do at all, but you have to watch over them or keep them company, or you're not allowed to go places by yourselves. You have to go together, right? So you are being loyal in those cases, but you might not consider it a good thing. There are other words that you can use for that. You could call it a burden, like we said before. You could say obligation. Obligation is usually kind of neutral, but some people consider it bad. An obligation is something you have to do, right? So there are different words that have different emotions attached to them. Loyalty has a positive attachment to it. So while we're going through the Declaration of Independence, I'm mostly going through it to try to make sure that you understand what it is saying to answer questions and things later. But also keep in mind what type of words you can find in here and what is or what are the emotions that are associated with those words. If you don't know, because you don't know the definition of the word, take time to look up the words and see whether or not you view it as a good thing, as a bad thing, or a neutral thing. Some things are just neutral. They're not good or bad. You can use them for any particular situation. All right, so now that we've got all of the preliminaries out of the way, we're going to dive straight into the Declaration of Independence. So when you click the link, you're going to get this page. This is the National Archives. This is not an Edmentum site, but because the Declaration of Independence is so important to U.S. history, you can find it up for free in a lot of places. So this is just one of those spots. So we're going to read through this, and I know that this seems like a lot. I'm going to scroll through this whole thing just so you can see how long it is. There's a lot of single paragraphs here. So it's got a big beginning and a big ending. There's not that much in the middle. So we're just going to take it a little bit at a time and try to make sure that everything's understandable. All right, here we go. Now it starts with, in Congress, July 4th, 1776. So this is just giving you the time and the place. It says, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. Right? So unanimous means everyone is in agreement. We have a unanimous decision. It means everyone voted yes or no. Everyone's in agreement on whatever it is. So if this is unanimous, it's saying that all of the states agree to this. It says, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary, right? So necessary means need, for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with one another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. All right, so this is a very long sentence, and there's going to be quite a few long sentences here in the Declaration of Independence. This is kind of how people wrote back then. They wrote very, very long sentences. So when in the course of human events, that's very plain. Human events is what's happening, right? It becomes necessary for people to dissolve political bands. So I think that's supposed to be bonds. But so we're talking political bonds. So how groups of government are connected to one another. If you're dissolving something, then it's falling apart, right? You're basically melting it. You're getting rid of it. You're destroying it so that it's no longer there. So they're saying it's necessary for people to get rid of political bonds that have connected them to other people, right? So just looking at history, the whole point of the Declaration of the Independence was the US breaking apart from Britain. So those are the two political powers that are breaking apart. It says, and to assume among the powers of the earth. So they mean the actual earth, the actual planet. So they're taking their own power that they have while they're on this earth, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, right? So they're invoking God, right? They're saying that people who are separate but equal, they're saying that we're men just like the people who are in Britain. So we have a God-given right to decide that we don't want to be ruled by Britain anymore. That's basically what's being said here. It says a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes that impel them to separation. Now, impel is one of those words that was on that vocabulary table. So hopefully you remember what it means. For those of you who don't, I will go back to the slide just to make sure. Personally, I'm a fan of having students look things up as they go along. But here we go. We have to urge or drive forward, right? That's what we're looking at here. So basically pushing. So causes that are pushing them to separation. So they're saying a decent respect to the opinions of mankind. So they're saying they want to respect Britain as a group of people and a power that exists. So they're going to declare or state the reason, the causes why they're separating. So it says here, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Evident means obvious, very plain. So they're saying these are the truths, they're about to list them, that they feel are obvious. It says here that all men are created equal, that they are endowed, that means given, allowed, have power, right? By their creator with certain unalienable rights. So unalienable means something that you can't violate. These are rights that people should have just for being alive. There are things that you deserve just because you are a person, and those are the rights that they're saying exist. And then they give you more information. What are those rights? That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So they're saying that when you check into this world, right, you automatically come with the right to be alive because you've been born. Liberty, which is freedom, right? You are a person who was born free, so you should be able to have freedom to pursue things that you want. And then it says here, pursuit of happiness. So not even just pursuing things you want in terms of taking care of yourself, but also to try to figure out what makes you happy. Being alive means that you should be able to find things that make you happy and do those things. And then it says here, to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men. So it says they're telling you what the point of a government is, right? It's to organize society so that people can do these things, so that people can live, so that people can be free and have there's basically rules that you follow, but the point of the rules is so that society can stay safe so people can keep living in them. That's the idea anyway. And then the pursuit of happiness. So by keeping people alive and healthy, you'll actually be able to figure out how to do the things that will make you happy. And then it says, deriving these powers just from these just powers from the consent of the governed. So here, deriving means where they get something from. So if you derive something, you're getting something from another source. So they're saying here that governments get their powers to help society be organized by the consent of the governed. So that means that people have to agree to have a government that passes these rules and does these things to be in power. If you're in a country and you have a government that isn't doing what you want, they're basically saying that they believe in democracy, for people to choose people in government that are going to service the people, what people want, right? And then it says here that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, so whenever a government stops doing the things they just listed, life, allowing people to be organized so they can pursue life, liberty, or pursuit of happiness, it says it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers, in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So this sentence basically says, when the government stops helping people find those things, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, the people have the right to alter, that means change, or abolish, that means get rid of. So they're basically laying out the definition of why they think they have the right to leave Britain's rule. They're saying that Americans, these states, don't think that the British government is looking out for their best interests anymore. It's not staying organized to help them find these three things, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So they are breaking away from Britain to form their own government, right? So alter means to change. That's basically what's happening. And abolishing it. So obviously the British government still exists, but America doesn't want to be ruled by it anymore. And then it says laying its foundations on principles and organizing its powers. So they have the right to start a new government and do something new to affect their safety and happiness. And then it says here, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be charged for light and transient causes. Now there's a couple words here. We're going to go ahead and look them up while we're here. So we have prudence, right? We have transient. Dictate, also maybe for some students as well. But dictate is fairly simple. It's a word that is still used today, whereas some of these other ones are not quite used as often. So dictate just means someone is telling you what to do and what follows. So an example is if you dictate text to someone, basically you're telling them what to write down. So if prudence is dictating something, they're basically saying this is what naturally follows. Now, just to make sure that we're on the right track, we're going to look up prudence. I want you guys to get in the habit of looking these things up. So I'm including these here. Now, prudence says the ability to govern and discipline oneself by the use of reason. So this is important here, right? The Declaration of Independence is saying that people shouldn't make rules and organize just to do it, just so people can have power. The point is that it's reasonable and makes sense. So because they think that being able to govern yourself by reason and logic is important, if they follow that idea, that dictates, right, that governments long established should not be changed for light. And then we have transient, so we'll look that up next. Transient causes. So transient means passing quickly into and out of existence, right? So going back and forth. Transit, right, is like traveling. That prefix trans basically means moving to and from in some way. So transient is about passing in and out of existence. It exists for a second and then it's gone, something that's temporary, right? So they're saying here that since governments are supposed to rule and be organized by reason, you shouldn't change governments for small reasons that come and go, right? It says here light and transient. So what they're saying here is if we're changing the government, if we Americans are breaking away from Britain, then there has to be a big reason to do it, because you can't just change rules on a whim just because it doesn't work for one person or a small group of people, right? The goal of a government is to help everyone at large, most people. Obviously, if you're like a criminal, for example, the law is not going to work in your favor, right? But you can't change the law to suddenly say that hurting people is wrong or that thieving is wrong just because you want to be the person to do that, right? That doesn't make logical sense. So that's the point that they're making here. You don't change things just for any old reason. So they're trying to acknowledge here that yes, they're breaking away from Britain, but they're not doing it for what they believe is a small reason, and they understand that it's not something to be taken lightly. And then it says here, and accordingly, all experience hath shewn, that's basically shown, that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. All right, so there's a couple of words here. Experience has shown, that's very simple. And then it says mankind are more disposed. Disposed means seen to. This is their nature. Their nature, this is what they do. So they're saying that men usually will suffer if they can suffer and live, right? So suffer means to have a bad time, but you can survive, right? There's things that are worse than suffering. You could like pass away. You could have like a grievous injury that stops you from being able to do a bunch of things. But what they're saying here is that when people are having a bad time, right, they're suffering, if they're still alive, most people will just suffer instead of changing anything about what's going on or fighting to change anything. And then it says here, but when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object convinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. All right, so let's stop there because this is a long sentence, right? So a long train of abuses and usurpations. When you usurp something, and we can look this up just to make sure, but when you usurp something, you're taking something from someone else. So usurp, I'm going to put usurpation in there, but usurp is the root word. You could also search for that and see that's what pops up. It says to seize, that means to take, and hold by force and without right. So they're saying when a long train of abuses and people taking things, like forcefully taking things from you, pursuing invariably means that something doesn't change. So if something varies, that means it changes. Invariably means that it's not changing. The same object, the same object with a capital O, sorry. So they object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. So we had a couple more words here. We're going to look up evinces and then despotism. So evinces. So this is the outward evidence of. So this is basically an older word that's related to evidence. It says here to display clearly, right? And then we have despotism, which is a very interesting word and fun to say. Oh, I left out an S. All right, here we go. So this is an oppressive absolute power and authority exerted by government. So despotism is when you have someone in charge and they are abusing their power, right? They're very oppressive. They are not using their power well. So when we come back and read it all together, a long series of abuses and usurpations, so people forcefully taking things from you, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. So what it's saying here is that the people have suffered these abuses, things being taken away from them, those usurpations. It evinces a design means it becomes obvious, right, that the goal is to reduce. Reduce means to sort of like diminish something, to like make it smaller, right? So if you reduce like a pile of clothes, that means you're putting stuff away, right? It's becoming smaller. So you're making people feel small, you're oppressing them, you're treating them awfully, you're taking their things, right? So they're calling that despotism. That's basically what it is, right? When a ruler isn't being right and doing well by their people. So they're saying that this is the cause for them deciding something has to change. So, long story short, this part of the sentence says, well, when you're treating people badly and abusing your power, that's pretty much what this section says. And then it says, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security. Now, that's pretty easy to understand, right? When you have a power that's abusing what authority they have, they're taking things from you, they're not treating you right. They're saying it is the right of people to throw off or get rid of that kind of government and find new guards, that means people to protect them for their future security. So to make them safe. They're saying if you're a government that's doing bad by your people, then they deserve to tell you to go. Now, the next sentence here, it says, such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies. So now they're bringing it all together. They use this first part of the paragraph to sort of define, here's what we think people have a right to. Here is what people should do if they're in a situation where they're being abused by their government. Here's what people should do to fight back if the power that's supposed to be taking care of them is not taking care of them. And then they connect it. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies. So they're saying now that we've defined all this stuff about what people have the right to do, this is our situation. That's what they're saying. This is what we've been going through. And now, and such is now the necessity which constrains them. Constrains means to hold back or push someone to do something, to alter their former systems of government. So now they're saying, this is our experience, and this is why we're changing the fact that we're ruled by Britain. We're going to do our own thing because we've suffered all these things that we just talked about. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations. So there's usurpations again. So he's taking things from them forcefully. Injury is when you hurt yourself, right? It's like a wound. So they're saying he's hurt the people and he's taken things from the people. All in having direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. So tyranny is when you specifically have a king, someone at the tippy top, who is just abusing their power over a people. So despotism is pretty much when you are part of a government and you're treating people badly. But tyranny is when you are at the very, very top. You're like king status, and you just don't care about what happens to your people at all. So those words are related. Despotism is the attitude to behave that way. Tyranny is like the name of what we call the state of people who are being ruled by that. So it says, to prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. So this is where it starts to get juicy, right? They're like, so we've said all these things about how we're being treated terribly by Great Britain and their king specifically. So now they're like, all right, it's time to spill the tea, right? We're going to give you a list of everything he's done. Just in case you don't think that we're telling the truth, here's a list of all the things that he's done. So then we get into this list. That's the whole middle of the document, right? So we're going to take these one by one. We've got, he has effused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. So assent basically means to agree, but just to make sure, we're going to put assent here. Yep, to agree or to approve of something, right? So they're saying he doesn't approve of laws that are necessary for the public good. So whenever they suggest something that like overwhelmingly everyone wants, they're like, yeah, we need this, he's like, no. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance. So immediate means it has to be done right now, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be attained. So basically, he's stopping even the people who work for him from passing laws that will help people until they get his approval. And then it says, and when so suspended, he is utter neglected to attend them. So he's got a big old waiting list of laws that people have petitioned and voted on having put into law for the good of the colonies. And he just refuses to pass them because he doesn't want them to, one, have the power to decide what's happening to them. And two, again, their claims is that he's a really terrible king and he doesn't care about them. He has refused to pass other laws, right? So refuse means to not do. So to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish means to give up, the right of representation in the legislature. So they're saying here, he won't pass laws for large groups of people unless they give up the right to propose new laws. So he's basically sort of blackmailing them. He's like, well, I'll pass these laws you really want if you'll sign on the dotted line and say that you don't get to pass anything else. And then it says a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. So they're basically saying that only tyrants do this. Most people can vote and petition. That means like plead or like submit paperwork to try to pass laws. It should be their right as people to be able to do this. If everyone in this town knows that the town needs this rule in place to be able to operate well or stop bad things from happening, they should be able to say, okay, we need you to pass this. Almost all of us are in agreement. We need this to pass. But instead, the king is like, no, not unless you give up your right to pass any more laws. We don't want that. You guys are doing too many rules. You guys are doing too much. I don't want that. So when it says here, he has called together legislative bodies. So legislative means in terms of passing law. A body is a group of people that are there to do something specific. So legislative has to do with laws. So a legislative body is a group of people that is around to pass laws or look at laws. So it says he's called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records. So far away from where anybody can record anything, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. So this basically says he's calling them to meet the people who look at the laws, unusual places, so weird places, uncomfortable to be there. It's hard to do your job when you're uncomfortable, right? And then it says distant from the depository of their public records. So he's telling them to meet in places where it would take a month, 2 months, sometimes even 3, to get back to where they can file paperwork to let people know what's happening. So he's calling people out to weird spots that are far away. They can't keep records about what's going on. So if anybody needs to know what happened, what laws were passed, people don't know. And then it says here with the sole purpose of fatiguing them. Fatigue means to be tired, right? So he's trying to basically make things so difficult that they'll give in to him wanting them to give up their rights to even make laws in the first place. If you make it so inconvenient for people to do stuff, he's hoping they'll quit. So it says he has dissolved representative houses. So these are another type of legislative bodies. This is just the name of one. So representative houses is when you get a group of people together that represent a group of people. So we have a House of Representatives now. So people have different districts. Those people in those districts vote for someone to represent them and what they need in that district. So it says he has dissolved representative houses repeatedly, so over and over, for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. So when he gets mad that they're like, hey, you're not really, helping us do our jobs. We need you to be better. You're not giving us the things we need. He's just like, all right, dismissed. The meeting is done. We're not doing this. Which is another way to stop people from making progress. It says here, he has refused for a long time after such dissolutions. So dissolving, again, to take apart, to break apart, to get rid of. So he's refused for a long time after this has happened, basically, these dissolutions, to cause others to be elected. So he'll get rid of the groups that were meeting that were telling him, yo, we don't like what you're doing. We need you to do something else. And then he'll send other people and say, oh, these are your representatives now. People that weren't voted for. So it says, whereby the legislative power, so remember, legislative has to do with law, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise. So it says here, basically, he's sending the people who are part of these representative houses, these legislative bodies, back to where they came from. They're going back to where they originally were, with these other people that he's hired who don't know anything about the location, the space, the people. And then it says the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all of the dangers of invasions from without and convulsions within. So whenever you get rid of groups that are supposed to help keep a state or a group of people organized, when you get rid of them, it's very easy for other people to come in forcefully and basically say, oh, y'all don't have anybody protecting y'all don't have anybody enforcing these rules. Well, I'm just going to come in with my people and we'll do whatever we want. So when you make people leave their jobs, when you make people stop, like coming in to actually keep the peace and keep people organized, a new group can slide right in and just decide to organize things the way they want. And since the king is not responding to any of the laws that people are asking for to help keep them safe, they don't even have like the rules to even be able to say like, oh, we're going to fight back because it's our right. Like the issue here is that if you don't have anyone backing you, right, legally, then it becomes a problem of you not even having the right to tell other people who are invading you that they have to go. During this time, a lot of the states started organizing their own militias, so like groups of people from the neighborhood basically to defend one another, because the king just wasn't upkeeping those kind of things. So we have here, he has endeavored. Endeavored is a big fancy word for working or putting in effort. Also like trying, but in a way that implies like actual work. So he has endeavored to prevent the population of the United States. So he's been trying to stop America from having so many Americans with that same mindset in there, right? So it says here, for that purpose, he's obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, or raising the conditions of the appropriations of lands. So what this means is he's stopping people from becoming Americans, right? So because America's been functioning separately from Britain at this point, whenever people come over to America, they're expecting to become an American citizen and be able to do all the American things, right? He's stopping people from being able to become citizens of America, because he's hoping if they don't gain more people, then there won't be as many people to fight him on what he's doing. And he's also not letting them send messages, like across the pond to Britain to encourage people to come, right? But you do actually need people to work a new land, right? You need people building things, writing things, doing things so that everything can function. People have to grow food. People have to deliver food. People have to build things, fix things, help heal people. You need people to do that. And if you're stopping people from Britain from coming over, then you're basically trying to kind of like starve out the people who are already there by not offering them resources or relief. And then it says, lastly, raising the conditions for new appropriations of lands. So basically making it more difficult for the American colonies to add more land or more states to the Union. It says here, he has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. So basically, he's stopping people in America from being able to even pass judgment on laws that are happening, right? Or like laws that are broken. So you need judges, right? You need people to actually look at and read documents and decide like what has actually happened here. What is it that we need to actually deal with legally? You need people who know the law, who know like what is allowed and what isn't. And then it says here, by refusing his assent, remember that's agreement, to laws for establishing judiciary powers. So he's stopping them from passing laws that can put people in the position to make judgments on legal things. And part of the reason for doing this is because if you don't have a group of people with that power, then there's less chance that someone can say, oh, we're going to pass this law. So he's basically made it so that everything that has to do with law and legal things have to go through him and Britain, instead of them having their own judiciary, that means judging in terms of legal stuff, powers. It says here, he has made judges dependent on his will alone. That's exactly what we were talking about. They have to go through him for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. So basically, he's in charge of who becomes a judge, how much they get paid, how long they can work. They don't get to decide any of that on their own. And the part of the reason why this is crazy is because he's all the way in Britain. It's not like the king makes frequent trips to America, right? He's specifically trying to keep his power and hold over America by making them still go through him, even though he's all the way across like a whole ocean away. So imagine the judge in your city has just died, right? He was the only one processing all that paperwork. You have to send a request to the king to ask him to send someone from Britain to come to your town to take up that job, because there's no laws in place allowing you guys to choose your own judge from the people who are there. So imagine, like there were no planes or anything at this time. Everything was done by boat. And when I say boat, I mean like wooden boats, right? So months and months, someone has to carry that letter from a port all the way to Britain and survive the trip and make it to have an audience with the king to give him that letter. And then when he gets it, he's just like, no, like, you guys can't do that. You'll have to wait another couple months or another month for me to find someone who wants that job or assign someone that I don't like that job using the power I have. And then you got to wait another month for that person to go across the ocean on the boat and then get to the port and then travel to the town. And they're like, it's me. I'm the person who got hired here, right? That's like 2 months just to get one new person doing a job, right? And that's assuming that he sends someone as soon as he gets the letter. If he doesn't, then you're just waiting. Maybe crimes are happening. Maybe you need approval as a business to get something done, and everything has to be approved by the king. You got to wait for him to send you something signed, or for him to send another person that knows the law and can speak on his behalf. That's crazy. That means that like an entire town's business and the back and forth of how things work can just stop because one person's not there to do stuff. So we have, he has erected a multitude of new offices and sit hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. So this has to do with the soldiers that were there. He basically started having British soldiers occupy the towns, right? And when you were having to host an army from Britain, you had to feed them. You had to actually let them sleep in your house. They didn't have anywhere else to. And because they're part of the Royal Army, you're obligated to do that because you're a British citizen. So they're pointing out that they're basically sending, it says here, swarms, right? So that means like large groups. And it says new offices, but they just mean people that have like new like status titles. Soldiers have those titles, right? You've got like, generals, you've got infantry. All of those basically are new people who are being recruited to the army in Britain that they're sending over to keep an eye on the Americans. And they're not sending over extra food with those people. They're not sending over, like extra supplies. The cities in the colonies have to give them those things. It says here, he has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. So yeah, so this goes into things even more. So like not only people in new positions, but also literally standing armies. So you're asking, imagine you as a group of people, hey, we have people that are educated, they can do these jobs. We need you to approve of them to be able to do it. And the king is like, no, I'm just going to send a bunch of new people, and now you have to feed them and clothe them. And even though you don't know them, you have to trust them to do right by your people. Also, I'm sending my armies. You have to feed and clothe them too, and make sure that they're there to keep an eye on you, basically. And this is while he's not passing laws or anything that's helpful to the people. And punishing people for doing things that they need to do if it's against the laws he's already set. There's like no accommodations being made. It says he has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. So this civil means having to do with like normal everyday people who are living in a place. So he's putting the rights and privileges of his army over the rights of the people. It says he is combined with others to subject us to jurisdiction foreign to our constitution. So jurisdiction just means an area that you have power over. We'll go ahead and put jurisdiction into the dictionary here. Just going to copy it to make it a little easier. So jurisdiction is the power, right, or authority to interpret and apply the law. So this is more of what we've already, talked about. Basically, he's saying the Declaration of Independence is accusing the king of basically sending people and groups of like offices, like they said earlier, to apply laws from Britain to the colonies. So that's what they mean by foreign. Foreign means like not from here, something that's from another place. So when they say jurisdiction foreign to our constitution, it means that they're taking laws from Britain that don't really apply to the colonies and applying it anyway. So this is like foreign authority, and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. So basically people from Britain are coming over, they're passing laws that have nothing to do with what people want. No one's voting for this, no one's agreeing to it. And the king is like, yeah, I want that. It says for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. So by quartering here, they mean like breaking up an army into groups. So basically they're being watched constantly by the army. It says for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any of the murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. So basically some of the British soldiers sometimes get into fights with people and kill them, or even just beat them up for, not doing the right thing. Remember that at this time, Britain sort of saw the colonies as like a rival, right? Like they knew that the colonies weren't really trying to be ruled by the king. So a lot of the soldiers that were there already had like a grudge against American citizens. So when they got into fights and stuff like that, they're just like, like filthy colonists, etc. And whenever something like that happened, even though normally if you hurt a person, if you murder someone, you have to actually go to court, right? But the king would just pardon them and say, oh, I'm sure they were just doing their job. So we have for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. So there were rules that were passed that stopped them from trading, or that made it so that the colonists had to trade through Britain, and then Britain would just pocket the money instead of giving it back to the colonists. For imposing taxes on us without our consent, right? So these are a lot of what was gone over in some of the previous lessons. There were taxes on a lot of things. Britain was trying to collect money from the colonies. One, because they were involved in other things at the time, still recovering from other wars, and they needed the extra money. But also, if Britain had their hands on that money, it meant that the colonists couldn't use that money to like trade with other groups, organize themselves better or have better weapons or anything like that. It was definitely a tactic to stop the colonists from being able to amass wealth, right? So for depriving us, that means making someone go without, right? So depriving us in many cases the benefits of trial by jury. So trial by jury is when you're able to have a group of people that have to discuss things and make a decision to figure out who's guilty or not, right? So when you do jury duty, you and a bunch of other people get the details of the case and you decide who's right or wrong. So they're saying they went without that. A lot of the time, they just were made to see someone that was hired by the king, and they would just say guilty or innocent instead of having a group of people discuss it. For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. So pretended obviously means fake, and offenses is when you like break the law. So they would just accuse people of doing things without evidence. And then it says transporting us beyond seas. So they'd put you on that boat that takes 30 days and push you all the way to Britain to be tried. Now, part of the reason why they did this was because once you're there, it would take such a long time to even figure out if you were tried as guilty or innocent, that if you went missing, what are people in the colonies going to do about it? And then on top of that, if you're being judged by someone who wasn't there, that doesn't know what happens, then they have an easier time with just telling you whatever it is the king wants you to be, innocent or guilty. And then on top of that, by removing you from where you were maybe like inspiring people to maybe like not follow the laws of the time or something like that, those people lose like their leader or important people in their communities too. So it's more likely that they would just settle down and not be brave enough if you took the people who were encouraging that behavior away. It says here, for abolishing, remember that means getting rid of, the free system of English laws in a neighboring province. So this is a system of laws, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into the colonies. So it says abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province. So province is like an area, like a region, right? So what they're saying here is that they got rid of a government that was in an area, and they established their own government there, and then used the military to enlarge, that means to make something bigger, its boundaries. So they basically made kind of like their own little country, not too far off from the colonies. And they basically took it over and made it very like British run. So the Declaration of Independence is accusing Britain of basically using that area as an example for what it wants to do to the other colonies. It says for taking away our charters. A charter is like a group of guidelines for how people live or do things. So sometimes organizations have charters that will tell you, oh, this is the point of this group, this is the conduct we expect. It's not quite the same as a law, but it's like guidelines. And then it goes on to say abolishing our most valuable laws, right? So you're getting rid of charters, which is like guides for how people should be living and doing things. What's the point? What kind of mood are we setting here? Abolishing or getting rid of actual laws, and altering, remember that means change, fundamentally, that means like at the base level, right? The foundation of something, the forms of our governments. So they're talking very specifically about the king getting rid of the organization that people in the colonies had. So then we have for suspending our own legislatures. Remember, that has to do with legal processes. So legislatures are like systems where laws are composed, like made up, where they decide to discuss them to see if they're good or not, and then pass them. So legislature is just a group that deals with law and legal things. And declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. So this is more of what we were talking about earlier up, right? So getting rid of all of the governments that the people had to just put your own people in and tell those people you're taking over, like, oh, we just get to pass laws now. You guys don't have anything to do with it anymore. We don't really know what you guys are about or what you're trying to do, but we get to pass all the laws now because the king said so. So we have, he has abdicated. Abdicated means basically to abandon. So government here, by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. So this kind of has to do with some of the battles that led up to the Revolutionary War. So abdicated government means to abandon government. So basically the king was like, since you won't do what I want you to do, I'm not protecting you anymore, and the soldiers are going to attack you guys instead. Because if you're not just going to follow the program, then I don't need you to be here. And obviously the people who are colonists think that's terrible. They think if you are the government, then the goal should be to do what your people want you to do in their best, like to have their best interest at heart, not throw a tantrum, right? Because they're not doing everything that you want them to do. If they're voting and establishing laws that make sense and that are logical, it's really weird to just sort of be at the top and just say, I've decided that I have power, so you guys have to do what I say, even if it doesn't make sense. And then you fight them when they say that doesn't make sense. So they're just kind of, you know, finishing out this list with things that especially are bad. So it says there, he has plundered our seas. Plundered means basically to search and take things. So plundered our seas means that they're basically taking everything valuable from the seas that are nearby, and maybe dismantling boats for some of those resources. It says here, ravaged our coast. So ravage is like a specifically violent word. We're going to look this up. So when you ravage something, it's damage resulting from a violently destructive force. So if we click on ravaging here, yeah, to wreak havoc on, there you go. That's what I was looking for. To wreak havoc on or to affect destructively. So you're destroying a lot of things. So ravaging the coast basically just means destroying things that are on the coast. It says burnt our towns and destroyed the lives of our people. And then he is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries. So mercenaries are people that you hire to kill or do battle, to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny. So we know what death is. Desolation is like basically destroying something so badly that there's nothing left. And we'll look it up just to be sure. I really want to get you guys in the habit of looking up words you don't know. So yeah, devastation and ruin, right? So it is both of these things together. Devastation is when something is just like destroyed, it's messed up, but ruin is a lot too. If something is desolate, it's been destroyed to the point where people can't live there. So like you see the second definition here, we're talking about grief, sadness, and loneliness. So desolation is basically something being so destroyed that there's no community left there. That's where like the loneliness sort of comes in, right? So if you are desolate, right, it means that you've been messed up so bad that there's nothing good left. There's nothing for anyone to enjoy or come together or have a sense of community about. So desolation is like a very strong word. Remember, we were talking about those like high impact words. That's definitely one of them. So when it says already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, right? Okay, so we got a lot of stuff going on here. So he's transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries. So he's got fighters on the way, right? That's pretty simple. He's transporting them, he's moving large armies. Foreign mercenaries means that he's hired people from other countries even to be soldiers to fight. And then complete is just spelled a different way. This is not a different word than the usual complete. Complete means to finish, right? So he's finishing the works of death, desolation, we just went over that, and tyranny. And then we talked about, you know, tyranny being what you call the state of like a group of people who are being ruled by someone who's abusing their power. And then it says, this is the part we're getting to, already begun with circumstances. So that's like a situation of cruelty and perfidy. Now that's one of the words that we had in our lesson. So I'm going to click back over here. Perfidy is the quality of being disloyal. And if you look it up, it'll say basically the same thing. So treachery, right? So betrayal. So he's betraying his people, the king, by basically fighting them because they're arguing with him that his laws and the way that he's treating them doesn't make sense. So instead of trying to discuss things with him or reach some sort of, you know, like compromise, he's just going to send soldiers over to beat everyone into submission. So this clause says, already begun with the circumstances of cruelty and perfidy. So that's treachery, betrayal, right? Scarcely parallel. So parallel means something that's similar or equal. So scarcely means something that doesn't happen often. So scarcely parallel means something that we haven't seen an equal to, right? We haven't seen something similar to this in the most barbarous ages. So barbarous is like barbaric, right? So barbaric basically means like done in a very like savage sort of way. So if someone is barbaric, you're basically implying coming from like an age or a time when people weren't well organized and people just did things just to do things. They were just being cruel because they could, right? That's basically what barbaric means. I mean, just to make sure, we'll get a more scientific definition is what I'll do. Let's see. Oh, did I close my other tab? I think I did. Yeah, I did. Okay. So let's go here. Barbarous. All right, yeah. So it says here uncivilized, right? So civilization is when people get together and like create a city. So barbarous has to do with when people were very unorganized. We're talking people who just used to kind of like wander around. Back when people used to just fight over land just because, even if they didn't have people to fill it, that sort of thing. Lacking culture or refinement. So you don't have any like manners, respect for fellow people, that kind of thing. So they're saying that the way that the king is treating them now, getting ready to send an army to fight them, is a type of treachery, betrayal, disloyalty that wasn't even seen back in those times when people were uncivilized. Scarcely parallel, something we haven't seen or that we don't see often in a barbarous or barbaric age. And then it says, and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. So they're saying this behavior, if you're a king, why are you doing this, right? He has constrained on our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country. So I'm going to take a moment to just look up constrained because I meant to do this earlier. I think I gave you a short term definition, which just means to force or push someone to do, and that's exactly what it means, right? So it's to force by imposed. That means to push something on someone, to make them stricture, restriction, or limitation. So you're basically pushing someone to deal with a limitation that you set. You're basically making it so that they don't have very many other choice. So he has constrained or given people no choice, right? Our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country. So those people that he's had shipped over to Britain, he's basically saying, oh, we'll ship you back, but now you work for us. You have to wear our uniform, you have to fight your people. And if you don't, we'll throw you in jail or we'll kill you or we won't let you go back. So those are the choices they have. And it says to become the executioners of their friends. So executioners is someone that executes, right? That kills, basically, of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. So these people don't have any choice. They're not coming back over unless they're fighting for Britain. And either they'll be punished by Britain if they don't do this, or they're forced to go over and forced to fight the people they used to live with. And then it says he has excited. So by excited, it means like high energy, has like motivated, right? Domestic insurrections among us. So he's basically planted people to try to break up the organized governments that the colonists were creating. And then it says that he has endeavored, remember that word means like put in work, to bring on the inhabitants. Inhabitants are people who live in a place of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So this is a pretty bad characterization of the Native Americans, but this is how they were thought of at the time. So what this is saying here is that the British have cut deals with the Native Americans to fight with them. And then it says here, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished. Distinguished basically just means not sophisticated. Destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So they're saying that by working together with the Native Americans, they now have to deal with people on their own land who aren't really waging war the way that people in Britain would. At this time, most people who were at war, there were rules about who you could and couldn't kill to a certain degree. So like if you were enlisted and you were a man, essentially, those were the people who fought. Usually you left cities with women and children alone. There were also other people that usually you didn't kill, like people who were medical workers, because even if you capture someone who does medical work, they can also help heal your soldiers, right? So it just makes sense to make them like an exception. And what they're trying to say here is that by partnering with Native Americans who didn't know anything about the traditions of how these people did war, they would actually just kill everybody because they were being paid and manipulated to a certain extent by the British to do that. So the complaint is basically, you've got this other group of people fighting us and they don't even fight right, is pretty much what they're saying. They're going way overboard. They're literally killing every single person in the area, which is ridiculous because that's not even what we would do, is pretty much what they're saying. So that's the list of things that the king has done from top to bottom. So now we got these 3 paragraphs left. We're almost there. So when it says, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. So redress here means to revisit, readdress these things. So they're saying we've asked you to reconsider at every stage of you doing this. And then our repeated petitions are, again, requests asking, have been answered only by repeated injury. So instead of actually sitting down at the talking table, the king has just been doing crueler and crueler things to them. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. So they're basically saying, listen, you've done all the tyrant things. So I think you might be a tyrant. And if you are a tyrant, then maybe you shouldn't be king. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from the time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. All right, so let's take a look at this. Nor have we been wanting. So wanting means, right, you desire something, you want something. So they're saying nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. So they're saying there hasn't been any lack, right, of attention. We have a lot of attention from the British who are here. And then it says, we have warned them from time to time of attempts by the legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. So when something is unwarranted, it means that it's unnecessary. This didn't have to be done. So they're saying that they've warned the British people who are there that their laws, the things they're trying to pass, shouldn't be applying to them. We've warned them. We've told them this isn't right, is what this is saying. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. So they're saying we've talked to them, we've reminded them of how we got from Britain to here and how the colonies came to be. So they know the history, they know how we're here, they know why we're here. Britain didn't care until we started, like making money, basically. So they know that this is essentially our land, right? That's how the colonists felt about it. They felt like, well, listen, we had to develop this. When we were sent over here, you guys didn't care about what was happening to us. We did our own settlements. We had to build this from the ground up. So we feel a sense of ownership over it. Because it's not like we did it with any help from you. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity. And that's another word from the table. So we'll look at it over here. And it's the quality of being nobly generous, right? So being generous, but for noble reasons. So it implies that you are generous and you're doing it for the right reasons, right? So we have appealed to their native sense and magnanimity. So basically they're saying we tried to do this the nice way. We tried to do this while telling them that they were, good people doing the right thing. We tried to encourage them to understand why it was right to not oppress us like this. And then it says, and we have conjured means to come up with, them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations. So we've tried to explain to them, we're related. We're originally from the same country. Why are you trying to take us over? We're not any different from you. So disavow means basically to denounce, right? So to say it's not right. So they've been trying to convince them that this isn't right and that they should stop doing it. And then it says, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. Yeah, so we have conjured by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. So they're just saying they did it a lot. They basically stopped the back and forth amongst each other to try to convince the British that were there to do the right thing. And it says they too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. Now, consanguinity is a big boy. So let's consanguinity. Here we go. So this is by a close relation or connection. So sanguine is a word that means blood, right? So consanguinity means we share the same blood, as in we come from the same people, right? So close relation and connection. That's basically what this is. So since the people who are colonists now came from Britain, and the British soldiers, the judges, the people in offices, like the positions of authority, right? They're all also from Britain. So they've tried to convince them like, hey, we shouldn't be ruled by you. This doesn't make any sense. We've done all of our things ourselves. When you guys do your own thing over there, no one here is trying to stop you from doing any of those things. And basically just saying, are you really gonna fight us? We're basically on the same team. We're all governed by the same king. We're the same people. So are you really gonna look at all the terrible things that are being ordered to be done to us and just say, oh, that's cool because it's not happening to me? That's basically what this is saying here. They've been deaf to that argument. So when it says, we must therefore acquiesce means to give in. So we must give in, like therefore give in to the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. So basically it's saying here, we've done everything that we've could. So at this point, we have to give in to the right to defend ourselves. We're going to separate the way that any other group of people or country would, and we're just going to have to view you the same way that we view any other country. Enemies in war, in peace, friends. So they've gotten to the point where they've tried to appeal to every level. They've petitioned the king. They've tried to convince the people that work for the king. They've tried to convince the people who work for the people who work for the king. And no one is agreeing that this has to stop. So they're like, at this point, we have to organize as our own group and view you, Britain, the same way that we view the entire rest of the world. So if we're getting along, we're cool. But if we're not getting along, we're at war. So then it says, we therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress assembled, right? So assembled means they got together, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. So when they say supreme judge of the world, they're making a biblical reference. So like God is considered to be the highest judge, right? So man can judge man. But God is like considered above man for obvious reasons. So the supreme judge of the world would be God. So it's basically saying that the representatives of the United States got together and did their best to pray and appeal to God for the wisdom and insight to know if what they were doing is right. They want God's blessing, obviously. So when it says here, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly, that means like in kind of like quiet earnest. I'll look it up just to give you guys a more exact definition. Is it? It's not solemnity. It was solemnly. Okay. Just making sure. It has a lot of different versions. All right. Yep. So it says here, marked by the observance of established form or ceremony. So yeah, and basically, and then it says somber and gloomy down here. This is mostly what I'm used to. So basically, solemn is supposed to be like serious in a quiet way, the way that you would be like in a church, right? When you're doing like a ritual for something important. So it's supposed to be kind of like quiet respect almost. It's a very serious sort of vibe. I'm sorry. In the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and the right and of right ought to be free and independent states. So they're saying here, you know, they've prayed, they've looked in the Bible to see if there was any guidance. And so they didn't find anything that opposed what they wanted to do. So in the name of the people who are trusting them in the colonies, they publish and declare that the colonies are free and independent of Britain, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British crown. So allegiance is like a fancier word for loyalty. Allegiance is basically when you are loyal to something by association. So you have a connection that makes you loyal. It's not just by choice, right? And that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. So this is at the point where they're saying, we spoke to people, we got ourselves together and decided that we don't want to be a part of this anymore. We're not going to be a part of this anymore. We're breaking this bond apart. And that as free and independent states, they have the full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all the other things and acts which independent states may or may not do. So this is also their declaration. They're not just saying that they're free, but that because they're free, they can decide on their own without any approval from Britain, things that governments usually decide. So like it says here, levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, that kind of thing. So all the things that a country can normally do on its own, they are giving themselves the right to do this here because of all of the arguments they've made above about trying to reason with Britain about what they want and what they need. And then here, this very last sentence, and for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance, on the protection of the divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So providence is like a kind of difficult concept to explain. Basically, divine providence is kind of like the God-given right to sort of like expand and live and thrive. I'll look it up here just to see if there is another definition, just to make sure. Yeah, so God conceived is the power of sustaining and guiding human destiny. That's basically what it is. And the quality of state of being provident, you come here, making provision of the future, right? So it's basically the idea that God has given humans the right to live and survive. So what they're saying here is they kind of worship providence as an extension of God. That's how they reference it here. The protection of divine providence, they're saying they're being protected by the right that humans have to live and thrive. And you'll see this in a lot of the documents. You've probably seen it already, especially since this is the last lesson of the unit. So, and for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence. So they believe that they're doing what God would judge as right. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So everyone in the colonies is basically relying on one another instead of Britain, since they're breaking apart from Britain. And then here at the bottom, you can see the names of all of the people who signed. We're not going to read through all of these because it's not necessary, but I just thought it was important to these were the representatives that signed. All right, so we finally got past that. So there's a couple of other things that I wanted to just take a look at really quick. Yes, okay, so this is where the link normally is. And then we have an analysis section here. So I'm just gonna read this straight through before I finish out the video, because they pretty much explain it pretty plainly here, but I'm hoping that since we just went through the whole document, you'll be able to make a little more like connection between what we just read and what's here. And then we'll, there's one other thing I wanted to take a look at just to explain, and then we'll close it out. So this says analysis. In the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson presents his claim in the preamble or introduction. So we didn't read the preamble, but that is coming up in a section. So we'll go through the rest of this. He states that it's become necessary for the American colonies to break away from British rule, and that he will next provide reasons for this necessity, right? So we literally went over that. He basically says, this is what people have the right to do when they're in really crappy circumstances. We are in those circumstances. Here's a list of all the things we've suffered. And then it says Jefferson supports this claim in the following section or declaration, right? So if there's something that you hadn't picked up on yet, it's very important. The point of the Declaration of Independence was to present an argument about why the states deserve to be independent. So it's not just saying like, I'm mad, so we're doing our own thing. They tried to write it so that anyone reading it could understand why they made the decision they made. They didn't want it to just be on a whim. They wanted to present a logical argument so that the colonies could seem justified in doing it. If you don't seem justified, like what you're doing makes sense, other countries might not trade with you. They might not want to deal with you. They might side with Britain over you, right? We're in a time period where usually when countries have revolts and things like that, they could get help from countries that were on the sides, right? To just actually show up and help beat them back into submission. But the point of them writing the Declaration of Independence was both to show Britain and other countries, as well as their own people, there are logical reasons why us breaking apart makes sense. This isn't just people being mad because they don't have money or food. We've been disrespected and abandoned as a people by this government. And if the government is going to abandon us and make us into enemies, then why are we citizens of this government? Is pretty much the idea there. It says the Declaration affirms that in order for people to secure rights like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, they must have an effectively run government. So effective means that it runs well. Should a government be unsuccessful in providing the people with their entitled rights, the people have just cause to abolish or alter it. This is almost exactly what we read. So we've got a couple other things here. It says, in anticipation of objections from the opposition, right? So this is the counter argument we're talking about. Them saying, hold on, I know that you might not agree with this, but here are reasons why it wouldn't make sense for you to disagree for this reason, right? So Jefferson offers the counter argument, and this is the selection that we read. This is from earlier on, one of the first paragraph, where we're talking about the reasons why people should have the right to pull away, right? They listed that most people don't change. They'd rather suffer evil. But when you're dealing with a lot of abuse, usurpations, it's the people's duty to get rid of governments that treat people like that. I'm not going to read it out again because we literally just went over the passage, but I will read what's here at the bottom. It says, this passage acknowledges the opposing argument that longstanding government systems should not be changed for trivial or fleeting reasons. And that's true. It does acknowledge that. It basically says, we're not changing this for some small reason, right? There's actual real difficult circumstances that have pushed us to do this. It proceeds to refute this opposing claim. Remember, refute means to disprove. With a sound argument. Jefferson points out that the train of abuses and usurpation by the king and parliament are not at all trivial. So he's like, dang, it's not like the government made a mistake once. It's not like they got mad and were bitter and kind of punished us just one time. It's been years and years and years and years and years of this. And not just them not allowing us to do things that'll help us to function, which helps us support them, but also they've literally abandoned us in some senses. So he compares those offenses to absolute despotism, which gives the colonists the right and duty to put an end to this repression. So he's like, this isn't just bad government, right? This is like actually going on a hate campaign for people who are supposed to be your people. That's basically the argument that he's making here. And then it talks about the continuation of the counter argument. That's that long list of things that we talked about. It says here, by creating a catalog of crimes, as Samuel Adams once called it, Jefferson focuses on and amplifies the offensive behavior of the king. Jefferson's list helps to validate both why the British rule should be overthrown and that the colonists' call for independence is not fickle or short-lived, right? And that's exactly what it is. He basically says, here is a list on paper for the records, on the record, of all the things that have happened. Anyone can read this. Anyone can try to, can look into it and verify it. This is actual information. This isn't hearsay. These are things that are actually happening. Here's the full list. Even if you disagree with one or two of those things, there were so many things on that list. He's confident that it will make sense that they will want to push away or not bother to be part of Britain or an extension of Britain anymore after reading that list. To further emphasize the severity of oppression in the American colonies and the need for separation for Britain, the Declaration uses several charged words. And they give you a few here, but we saw so many more. Examples are tyranny, duty, and injury. And these words call repeated attention to the corruption of the king and parliament. They appeal to the emotions of the audience through connotations of injustice and suffering. And it's true. You could just say, oh, well, the king treated us badly, right? But the word badly doesn't really like encompass, it doesn't really show you how bad it was. When you use words that people don't hear every day, what they think is, oh, this must be like really intense. It must be really severe. It's like the difference between when someone says, yeah, I'm happy, and like, oh my God, I'm so excited, right? Excited is not a word that people use all the time. So when we do see use of it, we think it's like amplified. Just like there's a difference between, I'm not feeling great today, and I think I'm feeling depressed, right? Using that specific word, we usually don't use those words lightly. So when you hear them, usually your brain's like, oh, whatever it is, it's got to be really intense. And then it says here, by using deliberate means on purpose, word choice, Jefferson hopes to rally others around the fight for independence, with no mention of the notion of freedom for the enslaved people or the indentured servants in America. And they added that to the end because it is actually important and we want to acknowledge they did want freedom for the American colonists from Britain, but they were not giving freedom to slaves who were working there at the time. They were just trying to sever the connection that the colonies had to Britain. They were not trying to deal with everyone being free and equal within its borders. And I believe that that is it for the Declaration of Independence. There is a little bit here about the Constitution, but I don't think you actually have to read through the Constitution. They just give you information about it here, and that goes into more of the lesson. So if you need an overview of this particular lesson, there's a separate video for that. I did want to stop here, though, on slide 19, and just talk about what it is. So basically, while they're giving you information about the Constitution, they talk about the preamble to the Constitution. So just so that you guys have the difference here, right? So the Declaration of Independence is basically a fancy paper written by people in Congress that was an official declaration on paper that the colonies were intending to break away from Britain. They basically, you know, like forwarded them the note and said, hey, we're gonna tip on out. This isn't for us. You're not treating us well. So we're gonna leave, and here are the reasons why. The Constitution, instead, is basically a list of the rights and laws that they wanted the country to be built around. So those are two separate documents. There is a preamble to the Constitution, and it is discussed here in this video. This is basically what this is. I'm just going to tack this on at the end. I suggest that you watch the video if you have time. It's basically, so first of all, the word preamble, pre means at the beginning, right, or before. And amble means to walk. So we're talking like travel. So a preamble is basically walking through an explanation of why something was written before you get to the thing. So remember when we were reading the Declaration of Independence, and that first paragraph was basically saying, here's the reasons why we're doing this. And then, or here's the reasons why we think people have a right to do this. And then it goes into the full, yes, we've gone through this. Here's a list of the king's crimes, right? This is very similar to that. It's basically an introduction. Here's the point of this document. Here's what we believe people have a right to do. And then what follows will be the document showing how to do that. This video basically just goes over how the preamble came to be. It's very short. It's easier for you to watch this video than to look it up because they give you the full text at the end. And I think that that is honestly about it. Yeah, because the lesson activity has to do with the Declaration of Independence, so you'll revisit that. Hopefully, by the time you get to slide 20 here, and you've watched this video, you'll have a little bit of a better time going through this activity and answering the questions. Please remember, I'm gonna stop sharing now. Please remember that you can go back at any time, stop the video, pause the video, rewind, so that you can um, review sections that I've gone over. Make sure that you're looking up those words as you go along. It's totally okay to have to look something up again if you've forgotten. There's nothing wrong with that. Vocabulary is something that you have to like repeat, right? That's why sometimes when we learn words, they don't stick. If you only hear a word once and you never interact with it again, you're going to forget. So there's nothing wrong with you having to look something up more than once. I honestly think it helps when you go through something the first time. Just write down the definitions. All those words that we pulled up, that we wrote down, if it helps you watch and listen to the video, and then after you're done listening, go back, pause when we're looking up words, you know, like forward and skip through, and then write those down so you have them in your notes. Then at least you have something to come back to if you forget them. But okay, that was it for the Declaration of Independence. I know this was kind of a long video, but when you have older writing like that, where the sentences are super long, and they have like a lot of dense like vocabulary, like difficult words, it just takes time to get through it. So thanks for hanging out with me while we went through the Declaration of Independence. This is Miss Amber signing off, and good luck with the rest of your English class.